Hey there, my name is Brant. Producer Sherry's here too.
There was a message that I thought you should hear.
Okay.
I wanted to leave a message for Brett and tell him that you have no idea how uplifting your show is. My grandson is on the Asperger's syndrome or autism, and he wasn't diagnosed till he was 14. He's 19 now, and it has been an incredible journey, and there were times where we seemed to have no hope or wondered what would happen with him. And to be able to see you be so successful and to be celebrating your strengths gives us encouragement.
That's sweet.
That is really cool. Thank you so much for that. It reminds me again, because somebody pointed this out to me again last week. It's funny how you know stuff and then you forget it and somebody has to tell you again. But there's a blind man that Jesus is approached about. They're like, why is he blind? Who did this? And they're trying to catch him to who to blame when somebody has something, some issue. Somebody did something wrong, right? Well, Jesus says it's so that God could be glorified. So think of all this stuff, whether it's autism spectrum or whatever it is. God's going to be glorified in this if we allow him to. And that's a good example of it. I can't fathom how he would do it with me, but I've heard that enough to go, wow, okay, so at least this is a blessing for other people.
So being on the spectrum, what would be your advice for him as a young man?
The first thing I would tell somebody like that, now this guy just graduated, but just anybody, frankly, in that situation, do not be shamed out of your relationship with God. This can be done by the internet culture. It can also be done by other Christians because you feel ashamed if you don't relate to God the way everybody else seems to. I just read a quote today that would have thrown me if I read this when I was 19. I think I was thrown by this sort of thing. But now I'm old enough now, I think I can handle it. But the quote was from a Christian author, and she wrote to, quote, allow God to cuddle you. Allow him to hold you in his arms. I don't know what that means. I can't understand that. Emotionally, I don't have that part of my brain. That's not the way my relationship with God works, where I can feel his arms around me, where I can just, every day just cuddle with God. I don't know what that means. And it's not a put down of her or people who are wired differently. But look, God wired you this way and he wired me this way for a reason. And we can't slink away in shame and say, well, there's something wrong with me because I don't relate like she does. That's her thing. She wrote that, but that's not normative for everybody. And God made you the way you are for a reason, and you will relate to him in your relationship. Here's one thing, especially for younger guys, kind of ramping on what I just said. Do not let internet culture interfere with your beliefs about God. It's very difficult to do this because there's especially people in the autism spectrum, we can get into debates, analysis. We like certain kinds of thinking. We find it on the internet. And the idea is that anybody who's analytical or intelligent or particularly critically thinking or critically minded is not going to be a Christian. That is false. The problem is they're not critical enough of their own belief system. And many times I found that belief system crumbles in about 5 minutes. But they're very good at painting the picture. Like anybody who's analytical, anybody who's intelligent will not have beliefs in Jesus. It's a great idea. Find somebody, when you struggle with your faith, and you will, but find somebody who's older than you, who's intelligent, who's grappled with stuff, who's not threatened by questions, and say, hey, what do you think about this? Don't be ashamed to say, I'm really struggling with this. I mean, how could God, or how could there be a God if... Go ahead and ask the questions, but do ask the questions. Don't just presume, well, nobody's thought about this stuff, because we have, and there are some answers that can be very helpful. Here's another piece of advice. Sherry was asking me for 3 pieces of advice for younger people on the autism spectrum. I guess this could go for anybody, but I think it's particularly challenging for people like me. Oh, this definitely goes for everybody. But my 3rd piece of advice, do not slink away from God in shame. Don't do it. Yes, we get caught up in stuff, things that waste our time. This is particularly a problem, I think, for those of us who aren't socially, it's not easy for us socially. We find virtual life to be easier, throwing ourselves into fake interactions. There's a lot of fake substitutes for good things that God created that we can throw ourselves into. When that happens, don't just slink away from God and go, well, I've blown it. Go back to him. That's what he wants you to do. That's why we feel guilty. Like the guilt's supposed to drive us back to him. And then we say, okay, I got caught up in this. Pick yourself back up. Start walking again. Get involved with people, even if you don't feel like it. Get involved with causes that keep you busy. Experience real life, not virtual stuff. Because you don't want to look back in 40 years and go, look at the way I spent my life sitting, interacting with bits of information that don't even really exist. And it's not why God created us, and it's not a good way to be healthy. So I'd say, don't slink away in shame. Go back, start over.